We are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Kevin Gosztola, who's the managing editor of shadowproof.com, the curator of thedissenter.org, the co-host of Unauthorized Disclosure. Kevin, as always, thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with both of you.
Well, it's hard to even know where to start exactly with the Trump thing. There's a lot to dissect here. I mean, the way we promoted this segment, as I'm sure you saw, Kevin, was, will Trump be, I think, persecuted or whatever for his real crimes or made up crimes? And based on what we know now, it seems that more or less what this FBI raid was about, and correct me if I'm wrong, seems to not be related to the fact that Donald Trump just tried to steal an election, but perhaps something totally different. So I don't know. I mean, help us, put this into context of what's actually really happening here. What is the context around this raid that everyone's talking about?
Well, let me pull from my expertise and what animates me and just say that I actually watched and followed the developments related to this FBI search with great interest because of my history covering Espionage Act prosecutions and seeing how the FBI has abused whistleblowers historically and the way in which low-level government employees get abused for allegedly mishandling classified information. And in most of these examples, they are going to the press and they claim to be exposing something that is wrongful or corrupt, and they're trying to improve our understanding. We know these whistleblowers like NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, who exposed mass surveillance, or Chelsea Manning, or even on a very smaller scale, I think she still deserves to be recognized. Donald Trump's very first Espionage Act prosecution against Reality Winner, who just thought that since the MSNBC pundits are constantly talking about reports alleging Russian interference, I have a report, and this suggests that it could be serious. Let me join you're going to go to prison now because you tried to participate. And, so I watched this because I was interested, is this going to mean that Donald Trump is prosecuted under the Espionage Act? And I don't think he will be. I really don't. And I think that leads to a larger conversation about the two-tiered justice system, because the Espionage Act prosecutions that unfold are a part of the two-tiered justice system that exists in all parts of our society. And, in every jurisdiction in America, the rich get to negotiate their way out of being held accountable, and the poor or the working class have to do the maximum amount of time for what they're alleged to have committed. And that may be the key conversation here, is that he can flagrantly flout laws and get away with it even when the FBI has lost their patience with Donald Trump and go into his estate. And we could talk about how they entered his estate, but I think we see the two-tiered justice system on full display. He's just like David Petraeus. David Petraeus was able to have an affair with his biographer, who he gave very secret black books containing secret, highly sensitive conversations with President Obama about ISIS and the war in Iraq, all sorts of things that if you or I had jobs in the military-industrial complex and we went and exposed what was going on, we would go to prison for a very long amount of time. And he gets to negotiate with his legal team and only got a slap on the wrist, a misdemeanor, and a fine that he could make up by doing speaking engagements, because you get paid so much for being right. General David Petraeus.
Yeah, and also the woman who was responsible for writing that biography, I think her career was destroyed, which also just speaks to I mean, not that, whatever, I'm not defending her or anything, awful opinions, but that said, that also just speaks to being a man in a position of power as well. But, to what you're saying, Kevin, I mean, it was a really interesting display last week when we saw, after the warrant was executed, when we saw these figures on the far right come out and say, the FBI has been politicized, defund the FBI. And, we talked a little bit about the show last week about how ridiculous that was. And Eugene made a really good point about how these are the same people who are like the most pro-police. And like whenever anyone on the left is, rising up against, racial injustice, they're the first ones to say, send out the military, send out the vigilantes with their guns. But that said, I'm curious, like what you made of that, the attempt to try to say that the FBI was being politicized, and that if you support basically, if you support the prosecution of Trump, you're somehow supporting law enforcement and everything the left is supposed to stand against. Because it was an interesting attempt to raise a sort of contradiction that I think was quite disingenuous.
Yeah, so we've seen that the right wing has seemingly discovered the Espionage Act and discovered that the FBI can be an abusive organization. It's like overnight, they suddenly are awakened to being against the development of any neo-COINTELPRO style programs. But the fact is right now, as I talk to you, there is an Espionage Act reform bill that is been introduced in Congress. And there aren't any Republicans who have been outspoken against the search against Donald Trump or the raid against Donald Trump who have signed on to it. So it just tells you how serious they are when it comes to a policy perspective. This really is a new slogan, and I would liken it to the Democrats saying "Save Roe" for many, many years, in that they've figured out a way that they're going to generate voter turnout by saying defund the FBI. And, you know, it may sound good. It may help them win support over other Republican candidates. But ultimately, they're not going to do anything to rein in the FBI while they are in Congress. And obviously, we wouldn't even expect them to do that. And I think that it's fine if you want to believe that Donald Trump should be held accountable. It's okay if you want to believe that the FBI should hold Donald Trump accountable in the same manner that other people I've mentioned who are whistleblowers have been abused. However, I find myself in a very conflicted position because I actually don't want to see the Justice Department prosecute Donald Trump under the Espionage Act, because I believe that it would legitimize the Espionage Act more than any previous prosecution in recent history against any of these whistleblowers who we name, and including the upcoming one against Julian Assange. And because that Espionage Act is so built and steeped in the history of targeting dissenters and going after the left and harassing socialists and just going after anybody who would speak out against the wars that the U.S. has engaged in for now over a whole century. We're talking about warfare with U.S. military involvement. I just don't want to see it legitimized. But there are other ways in which Donald Trump could be prosecuted with other laws that they say he has violated. I think a point that you wanted to spend a little time on is the fact that there is this disparity in the FBI going into the home of Donald Trump versus other people who have been targets of FBI agents. It is notable that when you look at what happened to Donald Trump, they show up actually later than what was expected according to the warrant. Normally, the FBI raids your home at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning. It's like they want to wake you out of your sleep. They want to impose that kind of terror on you and you feel controlled. That's what happened to the African People's Socialist Party, which we could talk a little bit about. But they actually come at 10 a.m. They know Donald Trump won't be there, so they're not trying to inflict anything on Donald Trump personally. No embarrassment or shame by dragging him out of his estate. It's like we very nearly could have seen a situation where the FBI just knocked on the door and just said, "Bring out these documents, or else we're coming inside." And it would have been the most absurd display, given what we know about how leftists have been targeted, how this African People's Socialist Party has been targeted, but how other people are raided by the FBI daily, how these whistleblowers are targeted. Tom Drake, NSA whistleblower, John Kiriakou, a CIA whistleblower, have been telling their stories for the last week and a half of what happened when they were raided under the Bush administration, under the Obama administration, how people come in and they spend 7 hours in your home. They go through different parts of your home. They think you've got hiding places. They're taking your computers, your electronics, your books. They're going through everything. They walk away with like your entire life in your house, and you have to hope that maybe they'll come back to you some day later and offer to give you your property back.
Yeah, no, which, oftentimes people don't know this does not happen. They take your stuff, they never get back to you. But yeah, I mean, it really is, it honestly was amazing to see that. I used to live in Southeast DC. You would always see the marshals, because there's no sheriff in DC, come deliver these warrants for people, and it was like these high-tech military raids at like 5:30 in the morning. And you'd be like, what's going on outside my window? You think it was like a war zone, the way it was going. But no, I think you raise a very good point, and I think it speaks so much to the two-tier justice system thing that you've spoken to, really everything you said in a couple notes, is that, here it is where I think most people have seen, I mean, who knows, you have to go into court and it has to be adversarial, but a pretty aggressive attempt by Donald Trump to steal the election. So I think everyone thought like, ooh, they're raiding him. It must be about that. And then it's like he kept his notes with, I don't even know, on Macron and his letters with Kim Jong-un. And it's just like, of all the possible things, like this is the one that you're going to go with. And it just, everything about it just, to me, speaks to such an elite bubble that which you're in. Like the higher you go in society, I think we can say the thing about drone strikes and torture, like the higher up you are, the more you basically are just let off the hook for huge, huge crimes.
Yeah, so there's actually this clip on Democracy Now! Of African People's Socialist Party chair Omala Yeshitela, who was dragged out. And he was asked by Amy Goodman to comment about this search of Donald Trump that's occurring after he was raided. He was actually raided. I'd say that Mar-A-Lago was searched. He was raided. He had the battering ram brought out there were flashbang grenades going out around his home. There was a military vehicle placed in front of his house. The next door neighbor, they put tape over the Ring doorbell so the security camera wouldn't capture footage of what was happening in front of their home. That's a raid. That's those agents are. And they dragged him out. They sat him down, or they tried to make him sit down. He refused to sit down, but they wanted to control him entirely. And they never told him he was going to be arrested. They just basically detained him indefinitely for the duration of the search. That's a raid. But what he was saying was the ruling class is having a fight. The national security state is fighting this other part of elites. And, it's very clear that they are having this battle right in front of us. And I think that's the thing that is why we are a little bit uncertain of how to feel about this FBI search of Donald Trump's estate. Because it's not clear where the people are supposed to side. Are we supposed to take Donald Trump's side, or are we supposed to take the FBI's side? Or maybe we should just sit back and be spectators and watch this play out, because it doesn't actually make any difference to us what the ultimate outcome will be in this case. And that's why I think of like the people who have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act as the priority, and looking forward to how this might legitimize the Espionage Act and affect dissent in the future as being maybe the most highest priority out of all of this. But aside from that, what we're learning from reporting from seasoned reporters like Bill Arkin or William Arkin at Newsweek is that Donald Trump had a personal stash of documents outside of these records we've heard about that the National Archives wanted. And they were testing him, and he was actually collecting documents, they believe, on Russiagate that had to do with the investigation into him by the FBI and Justice Department. And the FBI and Justice Department went into Mar-a-Lago because they knew that he had those in his stash, and they don't want him to use those documents, weaponize those documents during any kind of future presidential campaign. So the FBI is acting as a political instrument, if that is true. If those sources are true, and Bill Arkin's a pretty good reporter, so if what he says is borne out and proven to be true, we might learn a little bit more detail, because a judge in Florida just a couple hours ago, or within the last few hours of this live broadcast, ordered a release of a redacted version of the search warrant affidavit. We might learn some details. So I think what it's going to confirm is that there very much is this war among elites happening before our very eyes.
That's a really, really excellent point. And it also speaks to, though, the fact that, okay, if that is what's going on, regardless, it doesn't, like, do they have anything? Like, is this going to, if they're trying to hurt his future presidential prospects, well, so far what we've seen is the entire Republican Party rally to his cause. It's really got right-wingers upset, and it's like almost like throwing them red meat, but the Democrats are the ones throwing the red meat. So if they are indeed, if this is like a political fight between elites, between Democrats and Republicans, won't it backfire on Democrats unless they actually have something on him? Which I feel like if they really did, we would know now. Do you know what I mean? So I guess, how do you think this is going to affect the sort of horse race nature of all this? Because it does seem like this could actually benefit a future presidential run by Donald Trump.
Well, I think it just puts us back where we were in 2016 when it was Hillary
Jesus.
Clinton versus Donald Trump, because they had nothing going for them in terms of the social issues. They were suppressing any engagement, i.e. going after Bernie Sanders' campaign, which was energizing people along the lines of several issues that are important to people of environmental, economic, social justice, racial justice, etc. So they suppressed that energy in favor of, as we were coming into the final weeks of the election, it's all about how Russia's backing Donald Trump to help him win and defeat Hillary Clinton. I mean, they're saying WikiLeaks is publishing forged documents from the Clinton campaign, which is a total lie. And so then that became the thing that was the story of that election, and the right wing ends up triumphing because they're harnessing this populist energy, which I understand is disingenuous, but it got people to the polls, and they were voting. And I think that there's a repeat here. And unfortunately, they had an issue that was working for them. Removing the right to abortion federally was animating people. I think even in my own home state, Illinois, they saw something like 120% increase in voter registration. Now, whatever the two-party system means to you, people are feeling that they're under some kind of threat, and they're ready to go in and elect some Democrats in a midterm year so that they can make sure that this doesn't get worse for people. And the Democrats have shown no willingness to take action to codify rights that are under attack. And meanwhile, then this happens, and Donald Trump is being targeted by the FBI and Justice Department. And rightfully so. I think he did actually violate the Espionage Act. When you go by the statute, he violated the Espionage Act. I believe in what WikiLeaks has inspired us all to believe, which is that information belongs to the people. So if you are a former president, you do not get to take any documents with you back to your home and treat them as your own personal keepsakes. As like your own, Thomas Drake calls them coins of the realm, because you're fascinated. Like, you want to show off this Kim Jong-un letter that you got that is a classified document. You don't get to do that. But I still don't believe that this is the right answer to the dilemma we're faced with Donald Trump, to go after him and prosecute him under the Espionage Act. And people talked about, actually, I feel like I'm in some kind of like circle of hell, because you can draw parallels to Eugene Debs and how he was in prison and running for president and got votes. And they're talking about the prospect of Donald Trump being in prison and running for election and getting votes. It is just like, what dystopian fascist fantasy am I locked up in? And can I get out of here? But I do think that what you're saying is a really good point. I mean, as we conclude and wind this down, I agree with you that the Democrats have undermined their chances of having some kind of surprise victory in the midterms by going forward with this search. But I don't even think there's coordination. I mean, I don't think it's coordinated. I think the FBI does this, and now the Biden White House and other Democrats had to figure out how to fit this. And they really have no choice but to embrace it, because that's part of the liberal national security culture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think they have their own agenda for sure. Well, as always, Kevin Gosztola, appreciate you coming down and helping us break all this down. Shadowproof.com, Dissenter, thedissenter.org. Everyone check out Kevin's work. And thank you so much, as always, Kevin, for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.